Good afternoon to everybody. If you can take your seats, we're about to start. Welcome. Welcome to this event being co-hosted by the World Resources Institute, United Nations Environmental Program, UrbanShift and Cities4Forests. We're really thrilled and happy to see you all here. Thank you for joining us. Here we are, the session Building Resilience with Nature in Cities. This event, and what a tropical event, very topical, is when we think about all the climate hazards around in the world that our cities are facing. From wildfires to flood, landslides, extreme heat, drought, rising sea levels, and more. I will be your host today. My name is Pablo Lazo. I'm the Acting Urban Development Director at the World Resources Institute, Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, but I'm also a member of a global platform, UrbanShift, that you may have heard. And it is my pleasure to be here with you today. I want to start by thanking the co-hosts of today's event, UN Environmental Program and the UrbanShift and Cities4Forests initiatives. Their support is fundamental in organizing today's event and for all the leadership that they bring to bear on the issue of city-led support for nature to build increased resilience to climate change. I also want to thank the other partners of the UrbanShift initiative, C40 and ICLE, for their support in implementing the project. You have come to a really good session, I believe, today, with a list of distinguished speakers, experts, and city leaders to discuss how cities can use nature to build resilience to climate change. But before we begin, couple of housekeeping announcements. You know, we have live interpretation. There will be Portuguese and Spanish speakers in the panels today. Channel 2 is for English, channel 4 for English, 6 for Spanish, 8 for Portuguese. If it doesn't work, don't blame me, and I'll talk to them and try to sort it out. Second, the City Summit organizing will be recording this event, and the recordings will be posted on this website after the summit concludes. And third, if you want to have a question on the panels, please tell the moderators when they have the time to do that. Now, a quick overview to the agenda that we have today. We'll start with a keynote presentation on the latest findings from the State of Finance for Nature in Cities report, and then we move to two sessions, two moderated panel discussions with elected officials and leading experts. The first one, on how nature-based solutions are providing urban climate resilience benefits to cities and their residents. And the second, on how cities can access the resources they need to really scale up the implementation of nature-based solutions projects. We will end with the closing remarks. So I'll briefly kick us the conversation and the scene and why it is important, this conversation right now about climate and nature in cities. And I want to give you two reflection points. The first one is about a recent research that indicates that for normal people, an increase of 1 degree in an extreme heat wave can increase the mortality rate in people over 65 by 6%. Now, I'm not a public health expert, but 6% is quite a lot. Can natural elements be designed in cities help to reduce this risk? If yes, which ones are those that are related to nature-based solutions projects, and how can we accelerate the implementation and financing of this? I think the panels will touch upon that. A second reflection point. In the US, specifically in New York City, a recent study found and suggests that parks and green spaces contribute to physical health benefits equivalent to about $2 billion reduced in health costs. I'm generally skeptical about how economists come with these figures, But what is now clear is that there is a direct correlation between having nature in cities and mental health. And the multiplier effects for cities are now evidence, clear and loud, saying we need more of these nature elements in our cities. Productivity increase, mental health, social cohesion, social capital, to name a few. And this is besides all the benefits we have on the environment with nature-based solutions in cities, such as dispersed air pollutants, clean air, reducing the effects of urban heat, flood risks, mudslides, and I can go on. So in the light of this, I believe this conversation is critical. And I also think that mayors, more than over 300 mayors being gathered in this summit, should think how much my city is valued by my residents if I do these type of interventions, rather than to think how much it will cost me to do it. There is an urgency in changing that perception right now. And now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce the first speaker today, Professor Eugénie Birch. Eugénie is a professor for urban research and education at the University of Pennsylvania and the co-director of the Penn Institute for Urban Research. She is also the lead author of a timely relevant report about the state of financing for urban nature-based solutions titled State of Finance for Nature in Cities, Time to Assess. Thank you, Eugénie, for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you very much for having me here. And I just want to say what a great pleasure it was to work with UNEP and its Center for Sustainable Cities, because it was they who thought of this idea and brought it to us, and we had a wonderful partnership in doing so. So let us go into what we found in this study that we undertook last year. Well, we all know that cities count, right? We all know the data of how much, what the population of cities is, and so forth. We all know that they produce 70 or 80% of the greenhouse gases. We all know that they suffer from the deleterious results of climate change. We all know that they produce 80% of GDP. But what we probably don't know is something we learned in this study, that 70% of the known climate solutions are located within the boundaries of subnational authorities. In other words, how important it is to understand what urban nature-based solutions are and how important it is to act on them. And we were so pleased, and I'm sure you were, to see Target 12 develop last winter of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was adopted in December, which acknowledged the importance, for the first time, of cities in mainstreaming conservation and sustainable use in biodiversity. So what does this mean? Let's move to the next slide. There are many, many opportunities for investing in nature-based solutions. And we do have, thanks to the UNEP Assembly and the work that it has done, a definition that's now a standard definition for nature-based solutions. However, what we don't have in much of the analysis about nature-based solutions is how cities count. Most analysts looking at nature-based solutions use land as a unit of analysis. Well, guess what? In the globe, who uses the land? What use are the land uses? Forests, agriculture, cities? Guess what? 3%. So if you're looking at nature-based solutions and trying to get a general overview of those things, 3% is meaningless statistically, right? So cities get ignored oftentimes in this assessment. Cities, however, really do have, as mayors know very well because they have to maintain these things, they do exercise and participate in urban nature-based solutions when they build parks, when they do river and wetland restoration, when they have sustainable drainage systems, when they have green roofs, urban farming, community gardens, and much more. That's urban nature-based solutions. And often these urban nature-based solutions are embedded in larger projects, which we'll talk about later is kind of an issue. So we know urban nature-based solutions and its co-benefits contribute to resilience, conservation, and biodiversity. But investors really don't know too much about this because we don't have the data that shows how important these things are. Let's think about how we can get people to invest now in urban nature-based solutions. Next slide. UNEP, for the past 2 years, has undertaken a wonderful project, which is looking at the global nature of global nature investments and finding the databases that talk about the overalls we talked about before, nature-based solutions. And the authors of this report, The State of Nature, Finance and Nature, have been very, very clever in finding databases that reflect these sorts of things. And they have outlined what the gaps are in investing and what the needs are globally for thinking about this. And indeed, in their research, they did begin to agree with us. I have to smile when I say this because we had some discussions with them about the importance of cities. They did begin to agree with us that maybe it was time to look at urban nature-based solutions. And so in their report, in addition to the very important recommendations they make for the global issue of nature-based solutions, they recognize it's important to put some emphasis and study on cities. The next slide. So as part of this, the research that we undertook this summer, it's very preliminary, was to take stock with UNEP what was actually happening in cities and see where we could count, where we could see what was being spent, how was it being spent. And so what this publication, the first, does, it begins very preliminary estimates about the gaps in funding. It certainly shows where the opportunities are for funding in cities. It has an assessment of best practices around the world, and we'll be talking about those in a minute. And also, we urge advocacy, the actions that local governments, the financial stakeholders, that knowledge partners can get involved with to scale up the investments in nature in cities because of the incredibly important role that those investments play, as we said in the beginning of this. So from our very preliminary estimates, we see that nature-based solutions received only 0.3% of overall spending in urban infrastructure investments. And often they were embedded or nested in those investments. For example, when we looked at multilateral development banks investing in cities, they might be investing in an infrastructure project that would have roads, might have some drainage, might have some tree planting. It might have other things that were hard infrastructure, but within them was the urban nature-based solution. But how to measure that became sort of an issue with us as we tried to figure out what that was. But what that did tell us was that we have to think about urban nature-based solutions as an approach that has co-benefits. And we're talking about development, we're talking about climate-resilient development, we're talking about embedding urban nature in the basic infrastructure that's being constructed, and then finding ways to account for that so we know both what its contribution is and what its costs. But as we said, data was scarce. We'll be continuing to work on this, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you as to ways to create that database that will monitor these things. But based on what we found, and it's not surprising, that the funding for urban nature-based solutions in cities in the past 10 years was basically 5% of the estimated annual subnational investment in infrastructure and other things. Next slide. So we have 4 examples that we'd like to talk about today, though there are many more, of how nature-based solutions, urban nature-based solutions work. So let's fly to Quito. Let's go to Quito and see what happens with their water supply. Many years ago, they established an independent agency called the Quito Water Fund. It's a trust fund that receives the revenues from water and public utilities and private companies, and then it can fund, of course, watersheds and the nature-based solutions in the supply areas for water, but also within the cities themselves. And they found it's been a very profitable and exciting way to fund nature-based solutions. This is a very successful model. It's been replicated throughout Latin America and has generated a lot of interest everywhere. But let's look at Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires has adopted a very ambitious climate action plan. And in that, they included a section on sustainable urban drainage systems called SUDS. It's a funny name, isn't it? SUDS for drainage. At any rate, and they are being able to get funding for SUDS, which encompasses all sorts of things, ranging from watersheds to building code revisions to green roofs and walls, tree plantings, wetland conservation, green corridor projects. So it's a comprehensive approach to urban nature-based solutions, not a project by project, but a comprehensive view within a whole climate action plan as to how to integrate this idea into those climate action plans. And recently, Buenos Aires received a very big grant from Jeff, thank you, Jeff, in partnership with Argentina's national government for creating green corridors. Next slide, please. So let's go to Miami. Miami plants trees. Good thing to do in Miami, it's very hot. So the mayor of Miami recently committed an extra $2.5 million to this project. It's an adopt a tree program. 8,000 to 10,000 trees a year are in priority areas, mainly in vulnerable communities, low-income communities, where heat is a problem. Remember the inflection points we heard from Pablo as you began? How important this is. Again, thinking of the co-benefits. So this Million Tree Initiative receives money from private donations as well as from the government. And lastly, our last trip will be to Monterrey, Mexico. Bright young mayor there. He's been having huge problems dealing with drought recently, but nonetheless has really gotten behind what he calls the Green Deal Climate Program, which he developed about a year ago. And this is an example of how the power of government can be used to incentivize certain private investments. So what he did was create a joint commission on urban development, mobility, and sustainable infrastructure. And what he's doing is mapping where green infrastructure is needed. And then when developers come along, it's a very prosperous city, they're always developing, and they want development permissions, he goes, aha, you want development permission? Why don't you contribute to our plan for green corridors? You can either contribute money or you can contribute land, but no green, no money, no project. So it's a hard and soft incentive for creating these nature-based solutions that are so badly needed in cities. Next slide, please. So we found gaps, obviously, in the financial area, but there are more gaps than that. We know, of course, there's great need in overall nature-based solutions and urban nature-based solutions. We can go on and talk about that for a long time. But once you have the money, if you have the money, you've got a couple of other things you have to deal with. And even before you get the money, you've got to have the data. You've got to prove and monitor and account for urban nature-based solutions. So that's an area of great need for development. We'll be working on that. And at the human level, and this is for every development project, it's the capacity gap. We need to have the leaders in government, in the private sector, in the non-governmental area, who understand what urban nature-based solution is, who can administer programs and support programs. So we need to have ways to fill these three gaps: data, money, people. Next slide, please. So what can we do? Not only were we interested in finding out what was happening with urban nature-based solutions and actually making a point that one should think about this when you think about nature-based solutions, but we realized that in order to address the gaps that we've just identified, we need to have champions. And so we need to engage and enlist mayors and city officials who can supply data, who are supportive, it can inform and educate the funders, both of the national, the public sector, MDBs, et cetera, as to the needs in their cities around nature-based solutions, as well as the co-benefits. We need, of course, to align and highlight local governments with national and global climate plans and agreements. And the Global Diversity Framework target of 12 is certainly a framework for doing this. I've already talked about the need to create global metrics to track progress. And again, I appeal to you to help us with this. And lastly, identifying investment-ready urban nature-based solutions at the local level is, and exemplary ones, is what's going to get us off first base and into a home run. So thank you for listening to this project that we've engaged in. We look forward to hearing the rest of our comments today about resilience and what mayors have to say. And we look forward to reporting to you next year about the next part of this project that we'll be engaged in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eugénie, for this great summary of that report. It is very timely and very critical. We have now going to the first panel about how nature-based solutions are already providing urban climate resilience in 3 different cities in Latin America. This panel is moderated by Robin King from the World Resources Institute for the Center for Sustainable Cities. Dr. Robin King is the Director of Knowledge, Capture, and Collaboration at WRI Ross Center. And in this role, she promotes collaboration across the network of WRI international offices to better integrate urban planning and resilience, land use, and sustainable transportation, using her experience working in policy matters in the Americas and in Asia. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Texas at Austin and a BS in Foreign Services from Georgetown University. Robin, please.
Is this working? Okay. Thank you, Pablo. After the last panel, the speaker, Eugénie gave us great data, and we see some of the challenges that are really daunting. This panel is going to present some mayors that are doing some really great things to give us hope, and some more examples of folks that are really making this happen and showing how nature-based solutions can actually provide some urban climate resilience. So we're going to start with with Mayor Jaime. Jaime Pumarejo is the mayor of Barranquilla, Colombia. He began his mandate as the mayor in January 2020. He previously served as the Secretary of Economic Development for the Atlántico state and as the Counselor for Competitiveness and City Manager in Barranquilla. In 2017, he was appointed Minister of Housing for Colombia. One of Mayor Pumarejo's flagship initiatives is to transform Barranquilla into a biodiverse city. Among many other sort of projects that he has to restore the city's ecosystem by placing people at the center. Welcome, Mayor. Could you please join us up here? Next, we have Axel Grael, Mayor of Niteroi, Brazil. Axel Grael, from 2013 to June 2020, served in the city of Niteroi as Deputy Mayor, Executive Secretary, and Municipal Secretary of Planning, participating actively alongside Mayor Rodrigo Neves in fundraising, project development, and implementation of actions in different areas of activity of the municipality. Bem-vindo, have you here. And last but not least, we're happy to welcome Deputy Mayor Santiago Bermudez of Desamparados from the Metropolitan area of San Jose, Costa Rica. Santiago Bermudez has a degree in chemical engineering and a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Costa Rica. He's 30 years old, so we have like the next generation of mayors. And from the age of 23, he served as vice mayor in the municipality, where his work is focused on the promotion of public policies and issues relating to the rights of children, migrants, and environmental policies. Please come up. And I will be making questions in English, but we've got folks that will be answering in both Spanish and Portuguese. So if you have any problems with your headsets, please get ready now so that we're ready for some very interesting questions. So we'll start with Barranquilla. In terms of, Barranquilla is a coastal city. It has a major river as well. It's very vulnerable to climate risks. What role do you see nature-based solutions playing in the city's efforts to adapt and become more resilient to the effects of climate change, both in the short term and the long term?
So it's very interesting. Barranquilla is a city that when you look at it, it's kind of got up a lot of the risks involved with climate change. First, it's on the mouth of one of the biggest rivers, or the most, it's a big river in Colombia. It's the Magdalena. 70% of the river of the Colombians live on the basin or on the what do you call that? In la cuenca of the river. So you're getting a lot of people, and it has a lot of sediment coming through it. At the same time, it's on the coast, the Caribbean coast, and at the same time, I guess it's a hill, and a lot of it is unstable clay. So you have a lot of propensity for landslides, where in the most vulnerable areas where the most vulnerable people live. So last year, for example, we had the highest precipitation we've had in a year in our history. So because of climate adaptation, we were able to limit the loss of life and the loss of property that we've had in that I would say event last year, versus what happened 10 years ago when we hadn't started to adapt, and we had 10 times more loss of property and migration because of climate change. Therefore, the good news is, if you adapt, it works. And that took flood and drainage systems. It took a lot of capacity building and a lot of even managing how we worked on people. So I would say the first and most important thing that we need to understand is things like, for example, using mangroves for protection against rising sea levels. Also using green zones to adapt areas of landslides. And most importantly, working with people so that the people that live in those areas don't feel displaced, but feel that their quality of life is better after you made the investments and you take them into another part of the community. Therefore, my life is better and my city is better as well.
Great, thank you. Next, Mayor Grael, what are some of the benefits from nature-based solutions that the residents of Niteroi value the most? Is it in health or water or climate? And what kind of solutions have you been focusing on?
Bem, inicialmente eu gostaria até de parabenizar nosso prefeito Pumarejo, porque eu conheci a convite dele, os investimentos que estão sendo feitos lá, e é realmente muito interessante. A cidade de Niterói caminha no mesmo sentido, né, que Barranquilla. Nós somos uma cidade de 500 mil de habitantes na região metropolitana do Rio de Janeiro, e nós somos bem no coração da metrópole, mas temos 56% do nosso território protegido por unidades de conservação. E em 2010, a cidade passou por uma tragédia climática com muitas mortes, e a resiliência passou a ser uma grande prioridade. Em 2014, nós ampliamos, né, a área coberta por parques, né, então chegamos a 56%, e estamos implantando esses parques. dos nossos investimentos é na implantação de um parque que tem como objetivo, além de proteger o ecossistema, oferecer oportunidades de recreação, lazer, educação ambiental, também tem como finalidade recuperar o sistema lagunar de Piratininga e Itaipu. Para isso, nós implantamos soluções baseadas na natureza. É o maior projeto, né, de soluções baseadas na natureza no país, talvez, enfim, no continente. É uma área muito grande, com sistemas, né, de tanques de decantação, com jardins filtrantes e que evita que nós tenhamos sedimentos e poluentes, né, chegando até a Lagoa de Piratininga. Então, hoje, é um investimento grande que, além, né, desses objetivos que eu falei agora, tem também como resultado oferecer várias oportunidades, né, de emprego e de lazer e recreação, porque fica no coração da região que mais cresce na nossa cidade.
Muito obrigada. So we'll now turn to sort of our third speaker. Costa Rica is a world-renowned success story as it relates to forest conservation, restoration, and that continues through a Jeff-funded program on transición hacia una economía verde urbana, which has elements sort of related to increasing the use of green and blue infrastructure, coexistence with nature, and urban and peri-urban reforestation and landscape management. Can you tell us why this project and the focus on protecting and conserving forests and nature is so important for Costa Rica as a country and for Costa Rican cities, please?
Excelente, sí, bueno, Desamparados, parecido a Niteroi en Brasil, es una ciudad de 400,000 personas. Hemos tenido un problema, sobre todo de planificación urbana. Creo que todas las ciudades en Latinoamérica de una u otra forma lo tuvimos, y hemos venido haciendo las mismas soluciones desde los años 80 a nivel de planificación urbana, y sobre todo a nivel... Costa Rica es un país con muchísimos ríos, y Desamparados es una ciudad que tiene muchísimos ríos, y tenemos un gran reto en este momento, y es que tenemos, con el tema del cambio climático y demás, han habido muchísimas inundaciones. La gente ha perdido sus casas porque se han realizado construcciones muy cerca de ríos, se han realizado una serie de, digamos, de una construcción a nivel de ciudad no planificada, y bueno, entonces esos son los retos que tenemos. Hace un par de años el proyecto TEU, que es Transición hacia una Economía Verde Urbana, apoyado por WRI, vino a darnos como un cambio de enfoque de cómo veníamos trabajando y trabajando con los ríos en nuestro cantón. Básicamente lo que hacíamos era agarrar un río, tratar de reencauzarlo, tratar de agarrar un río y entubarlo para quitarnos, digamos, el problema del río. Pero bueno, hemos venido trabajando con la estrategia TEU justamente para rediseñar cómo convivimos con los ríos, cómo es esa convivencia de los ríos con la ciudad propiamente. Y básicamente, bueno, ahora estaba viendo que en Buenos Aires también están invirtiendo en ese tema, y es básicamente generar zonas donde tanques de captación de zonas de captación de caudal que nos permitan en verano utilizarlos como centros cívicos, donde podamos dar deporte, artes y demás, y en invierno podamos usarlos como zonas de propiamente para poder hacer contención de caudal.
Gracias. So we'll now move to the second round of questions to go a little bit deeper, starting with Barranquilla again, and Mayor Pumarejo. Barranquilla recently won the WRI Prize for Cities for its great Todos al Parque program, so congratulations. Can you tell us why Barranquilla has been more successful than other cities in prioritizing parks, especially in areas, in underserved areas, which was a real emphasis of the presentation that you did when you won the prize, and what tips you have for other cities?
Yep, I think more than being more successful at doing parks, I think we've been able to be successful at doing parks that the community wants and needs, because we've been able to work with them to co-create these parks. And actually, there's like a huge backlog of areas that people are asking for parks. And the idea is it's a public space, it's a green space, but it's also what you imagine this park should be. So therefore, for example, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. In some areas, people say like, I just want more trees, and I want a walkway and a place where I can just jog in the morning, and that's what the community wants. Others, the majority wants a dog park as well. In others, they'll tell you, I want a lot of green space, but I want a place where kids can learn how to skate in the morning. And I want, in the afternoon, I want people to have like a small plaza where we can do, it's called carnival practices before we go out in Carnaval. So in a sense, it's community building. And it doesn't become your house. It becomes a quality urban space where people get connected to nature, where they hear the birds, but they also celebrate their birthday. They go out and have, the meeting with a town hall. So it becomes that quality urban space that was missing in a very depraved area of quality spaces. So I would say that has been the key. And the other one is that co-creation leads to appropriation, and people love their park and they take care of it. When we built the first park, and this is something I've said over and over, people would actually steal the shrubs that we planted there. And the theory behind this is everything that is done by the municipality or by the government doesn't last and ends up being stolen anyway. So I'm going to be the one that takes this shrub or this fern home because tomorrow there's going to be no park. But when they got there, the day afterwards, there was another shrub. And the day afterwards, there was another shrub. And the day afterwards, we made sure that the swings on the playground were there. And at last, what happened is that people understood that that was their house as well, and they started to take care of it. And today, we have 260 of those.
It's a great story. Thank you very much. It's a great inspiration for lots of cities, I think. So, Mayor Grael, so this is sort of shifting a little bit. How do you think that Niteroi can contribute to the political discussion in Brazil and in Latin America about the importance of conserving nature, especially for the Amazon? Even though Niteroi is very far from that, how can cities like Niteroi work with organizations like Brazil's National Front for Mayors, or of Mayors, to promote action and really move forward?
Bem, eu sou o vice-presidente de ODSs, né, da Frente Nacional de Prefeitos, né, no Brasil, e nós temos justamente feito o debate sobre a importância dos municípios, né, para o processo de transformação do Brasil, né, para uma realidade mais sustentável. Os municípios têm um grande papel nisso, né, e, inclusive, os principais avanços que nós tivemos aí nos últimos anos aconteceram na escala local. Para uma cidade como Niteroi, como praticamente todo o litoral brasileiro, são cidades que têm muita vulnerabilidade, né, tanto para a questão da elevação do nível do mar, mas também, né, os efeitos, né, das chuvas fortes, porque nós temos uma cordilheira ao longo do litoral brasileiro, e então a proteção de florestas, a recuperação de florestas, né, o reflorestamento, né, de áreas é uma forma de você proteger, né, a cidade contra acidentes climáticos, né? E Niteroi tem mostrado isso. Nós temos um dos maiores programas de recuperação de florestas urbanas no país. Temos uma experiência muito positiva de usar essas florestas como uma opção, como uma oportunidade de desenvolvimento através do turismo ecológico, porque Niteroi é muito próximo ao Rio de Janeiro, que o Rio de Janeiro ainda é a porta de entrada do turismo brasileiro, e então a forma, né, de nós nos beneficiarmos desse turismo é criando uma identidade própria, e o ecoturismo tem sido essa opção. Então, florestas são também formas de proteger e formas de gerar oportunidades de emprego, oportunidades, né, de trabalho para a população.
Muito obrigada. And in the case of San Jose, in the San Jose metropolitan area, what are some of the most important projects that have really brought benefits of nature-based solutions to the residents?
Sí, claro. Bueno, en lo que es el área metropolitana, Desamparados es una ciudad que es vecina de San José y nos vemos afectados obviamente por todo lo que pasa en el área metropolitana. Hay varias iniciativas, una de ellas es una ONG que se llama Aguatica. Creo que nosotros como ciudades, y creo que aquí los colegas alcaldes lo pueden decir, no podemos hacerlo solo, tenemos que generar alianzas con el sector privado, tenemos que generar alianzas con las ONGs que están en los cantones, y una de ellas es, bueno, Aguatica, que de una u otra forma se encarga de proteger las riberas de los ríos para poder alejar un poco a los ciudadanos que se han querido construir muy cerca de las riberas de los ríos, y además proteger propiamente lo que son los cauces desamparados. Bueno, y Costa Rica produce casi el 99% de su energía a nivel de forma hidroeléctrica o algún otro tipo de energías limpias, y esto hace que para nosotros el agua sea sumamente importante. Entonces la protección de los ríos, de que el agua llegue con la menor cantidad de sedimentos posibles a las hidroeléctricas, es trascendental, es trascendental. Entonces todo, de una u otra forma, las iniciativas que tenemos giran en torno a la protección de los cauces de los ríos, a la purificación de las aguas, campañas de recolección igual con ONGs, campañas de recolección de basura dentro de los ríos, y bueno, y una constante siembra de árboles. Desamparados tiene un lugar que se llama Loma de Salitral, que es uno de los pulmones más grandes, el último pulmón verde del Valle Central a nivel del gran área metropolitana a nivel de Costa Rica. Entonces también tenemos un proyecto para preservar lo que es propiamente eso. Ahorita no es un parque natural, Costa Rica tiene muchos parques naturales, y ese particularmente en Desamparados no es un parque natural, pero hemos hecho como ciudad de una u otra forma algunas estrategias para poder protegerlo, porque bueno, además hay una naciente de ríos ahí adentro, entonces hemos insistido mucho en la protección de ese último pulmón en Desamparados.
Gracias. Sadly, because we started late, we won't have time for audience questions, but I'd like to give each of the speakers 1 minute to say sort of what they think the most important thing that they like to convey and motivate folks to adopt nature-based solutions.
I would say that the most important thing is que sí se puede, or we can do it. I mean, when I started being the mayor and I started talking about something I thought was crazy, I said, I'm going to spend a lot of the budget that I have for investment in a 1,000-hectare eco park. And I thought people were going to say, this guy's crazy. And they didn't. And people wanted to see it. We're opening it up in June. And it's 5 kilometers of boardwalks through mangrove forests, wetlands, and whatnot. And we're reopening up a beach. We're building this huge area that we also cleaned up through nature-based solutions by taking microalgae from the same wetlands, bio-augmenting them, and then dumping them back in so that they would clean up that water source. That also forced us to go upstream and find other sources of pollution of that water source and start bettering those. So it's a never-ending cycle, and instead of losing excitement, you should get more excited, because that means that you're getting upstream into more and more problems, and that means you're re-educating people and you're changing. And in Latin America, that's our most important job. So stop asking us to reduce CO2 emissions and start asking us to preserve and conserve our environment. That's what we need to do, and the other rest of the world needs to stop their CO2 emissions. Thank you.
Lots of people, lots of folks will be motivated by that, I think. Thank you. Mayor Grael.
Bem, a nossa experiência é muito parecida, mais uma vez, com a de Barranquilla. Eu me lembro que na campanha eleitoral, né, o responsável pelo marketing dizia para mim, não fala de sustentabilidade, porque é muito complicado. E, obviamente, eu falei, porque eu fiz isso a vida inteira, né, e fui eleito, e começamos a a colocar a sustentabilidade na prática, e hoje, né, essa é uma das marcas da cidade de Niteroi. Temos recebido também, quer dizer, premiações e reconhecimento a nível nacional e internacional, e nós estamos, né, convencendo que essas questões não são custos, mas são oportunidades. Então, quando você protege uma área, quando você implementa, né, oportunidades, né, para o ecoturismo, você está trazendo oportunidades para a economia da cidade. Niteroi hoje é uma das melhores cidades no Brasil em saneamento, em coleta, tratamento, né, de águas servidas de esgoto. Isso também melhora a qualidade de vida como um todo. Então, nós vamos, aos poucos, avançando, né, na percepção que esse é o único caminho a seguir.
And finally, so,
Sí,
Mayor
bueno.
Bermudez.
Gracias. Sí, yo creo que lo más importante es un poco lo que dice el colega alcalde, es también que no estamos solos, ¿verdad? Tal vez en los años 80, en los años 90, cuando alguien hablaba de combatir el cambio climático, cuando se hablaba de esto, eran tal vez algunas personas, sobre todo en la academia, que siempre va como adelantada a los tiempos, se hablaba de esto, pero no era un tema que la gente lograra realmente interiorizar. Yo creo que cada vez las nuevas generaciones hemos venido trabajando y cada vez somos más que creemos en esto. Creo, y sobre todo porque vengo de un país que tiene 2 océanos a cada lado y que el tema del agua es sumamente importante, tenemos que seguir tratando de reducir el uso de plásticos. Todos los plásticos que de una u otra forma se consumen en todo el mundo terminan en los océanos y sobre todo en un país como Costa Rica, que vive prácticamente el turismo ecológico, se ve sumamente afectado. Entonces, creo que una gran reflexión es que no nos sintamos solos, que somos cada vez más y más personas que estamos trabajando desde algo muy pequeño, incidiendo tal vez en nuestra comunidad, hasta presidentes de la República de distintos países que creen en esto y que de una u otra forma estamos haciendo un cambio, y que yo espero que las futuras generaciones puedan recibir los frutos de estos trabajos que nosotros hemos venido haciendo.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing your experiences and your spirit. We look forward to continuing to work with you through WRI, through UrbanShift, through Cities4Forests, and UNEP, well into the future. So,
Thank you.
muito obrigada. Gracias. And now Pablo will come back for the next panel on how we pay for all these things.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin, for the great moderation, and thank you, the three mayors, for fantastic insights to actions that are really changing the context of nature in cities. Barranquilla, de Todos al Parques, it was an initiative that started, and I had the privilege to work at the very beginning in 2012. It took 10 years, but the transformation is amazing in that city. And that's relevant to the second panel we have now, about how cities can access resources they need to implement nature-based solutions and scale up and a fast-paced required to do this. And this panel will be moderated by my colleague, Todd Garner. Todd is the director of the Cities4Forests program, which provides technical support for over 60 cities around the world to invest in their inner forest, parks in cities, and green infrastructure, nearby forests, such as watersheds, and faraway forests, such as tropical and boreal forest. Todd is a green infrastructure finance expert, and he's the author of several WRI and external publications of the topic. So please, Todd.
All right, good afternoon. Could I ask everyone to stand up? This has been an awesome conference, but also a lot of sitting. And so, hands up, to the left, the other left. All right, and then shut your eyes. And picture yourself in your favorite urban green space or park with your partner, your child, your best friend, your dog, and doing what you love to do. Deep breath. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Now Shavasana pose. We're all going to lay down and take a nap. No. We have an incredible panel to finish off this session, which really brings together a lot of what we've heard this far. We've heard kind of why nature-based solutions in the urban context is critical. We've heard some case studies of where it's been done, starting to get to scale, how we overcome some of the challenges. Now we're going to focus on that next piece. Where do the resources come from? And how do we move this from high-level reports on the different sources of financing and the challenges of driving it to the ground to really understand from the key actors how they successfully have bridged that gap and brought different colors of money to the table to get implementation and activation of nature-based solutions. So I am honored to be joined up today on this panel, starting with Carlos Correa, the former Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia, and the former mayor of Monteria and the Institute of the Americas non-resident fellow. He has helped position Colombia as an international benchmark in the fight against climate change, biodiversity, and ocean protection, has been named champion of nature by the World Economic Forum, recognized by Nat Geo, and is one of the leading Latino climate action leaders last year. Please join us up here. Thank you so much. Joining Carlos, we're fortunate to have Mauricio Rodas, former mayor of Quito, Ecuador, and a visiting scholar from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Rodas was the hosting mayor of the UN's Conference on Urban Sustainable Development. He was co-president of the United Cities of Local Governments, board member for C40's Climate Leadership, ICLEI, and Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Please, thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, we are honored to be joined by Tatiana Gallego-Lizon, Chief of the Housing and Urban Development Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, but also brings a wealth of experience from her previous lead role in the Asian Development Bank, Southeast Asian Urban Development and Water Division, tons of experience in urban climate resilience, biodiversity, water, and regional planning. Thank you for joining us. So similar to the last panel, I'd love to throw out a couple of questions for each of you and have you take it from there. The hard part is over. We've got really smart people up on stage, and let them do their thing. Carlos, I'd love to start with you. At these types of forums, we hear about the necessity of investing in nature-based solutions, yet too often we still see infrastructure projects defaulting to gray infrastructure and ignoring nature. What is the role of cities and the role of the private sectors to change that reality?
Well, thank you, Todd, for the invitation. And you made me feel like I was in Monteria, my hometown, watching the sunset just beside the Sinú River. So I'm very calm today. Happy. Thank you, Todd. I'm going to do it in Spanish. Thank you to the translators. Yo creo que hay algo, primero, y aquí estoy con mi amigo, ex alcalde también de Quito, Mauricio, con Tatiana del BID, muchas gracias, y es, los alcaldes son unos héroes. Los alcaldes son los llamados a hacer que las cosas sucedan en el territorio. Si el alcalde no lo hace, nadie lo puede hacer. Y estoy hablando de política pública y de desarrollo territorial. Entonces, había un urbanista y alcalde de Curitiba por muchos años, Jaime Lerner, y él decía, si quieres volverte creativo, quítale un 0 al presupuesto. ¿Sí? Y los temas ambientales siempre están de últimos en presupuesto. Como ministro de Ambiente de Colombia, mi presupuesto era el 0.4% del presupuesto general de la nación. Y hoy es la agenda más importante a nivel global. Como alcalde, el presupuesto de sostenibilidad cuando llegué en ese momento en el año 2015 era menos del 1% del presupuesto. Y lo que hicimos fue voltear las prioridades para poder traer los recursos que necesitaban. Entonces, por supuesto, la banca hoy, el sector financiero, los diferentes sectores prefieren invertir en infraestructura gris, en grey infrastructure, que en soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, porque necesitan colocar el dinero. Y hoy no hay los suficientes proyectos de impacto y de escala que puedan atraer esos recursos. Entonces, ¿qué recomendaciones haría yo y reflexiones? Primero, hay que preparar talento humano, hay que tener gente preparada para visionar cuáles son esas soluciones basadas en la naturaleza con la gente desde el territorio y segundo, tener proyectos. Si no hay proyectos, no hay dinero. ¿Sí? Y por supuesto, profesora, la data, la información, la gente que pueda alimentar eso. Proyectos, talentos, proyectos de escala y la alineación con una agenda global. Si para la ciudad, para su alcalde, para las entidades, la agenda ambiental no es prioridad y no está alineada con la nueva agenda global, no lo vamos a lograr. Y educación y mucha comunicación y pedagogía con el sector privado, con el sector financiero, porque no el sector financiero no necesariamente entiende qué son las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Apenas hasta el año pasado en la UNEP tenemos el Nature-Based Solutions as a Concept y apenas está comenzando, entonces necesitamos muchísima pedagogía para alinear la agenda global a las ciudades.
Mauricio, I'd love to come to you next. You were a co-author on the report that Eugénie did an excellent job highlighting during the keynote. From your research and, as importantly, your experience as a municipal leader, what are those big challenges of getting finance on the ground and getting it to scale?
Thank you so much. It's great to share this panel with Carlos and Tatiana. I would say that probably the biggest challenge a mayor has when trying to seek finance for nature-based solutions is that of competing priorities, particularly in the developing world. And let me share the story of a good friend of us, the mayor of the city of Quilimane in Mozambique, Manuel de Araujo. He's a very environmentally conscious mayor. And he says, you know, I know the importance of this. I know the importance of investing in nature. But you know what? I need to invest in water, in sanitation, in housing. I need to deal with diseases in my city, malaria, you know, cholera, and others. So how do I tell my people that I need to invest in nature when I have these other very important challenges and competing priorities? And I think that there's not an easy solution to that puzzle. But I think that the way around it is for mayors to realize that actually investing in nature is about protecting people's lives. And there's no other greater responsibility for a mayor or a local authority or any authority than protecting people's lives. And when you invest in nature, when you invest in urban forests, for example, you are preventing landslides, you are protecting people from extreme heat, you are actually improving people's health, physical and mental health, you are increasing life expectancy, there's a lot of evidence around that, and you are improving people's quality of life. So that's when it becomes a priority. But I think that international support for mayors to realize this and to provide them with the necessary tools to communicate their population about why this is actually a priority is fundamental. And that is why the work that UrbanShift, that Cities4Forests are doing is so absolutely key. So keep doing so.
We will. Thank you. That was perfect. And that prioritization that you talked about and creating the narrative to your constituencies is critically important. But often it takes upfront money to allow you to do things now and then think about how to pay it back over a longer period of time, which is where the IDB often comes in. You also have a lot of priorities that you need to juggle. How do we make sure that NBS can be near the top of that prioritization list?
Thanks, Todd. You know, it was great to hear the opening from Jeannie. I mean, I had read reports that indicated that nature-based solutions, you know, barely cover a fifth of the investments that were required. You know, after hearing, but you know, most of this investment ends up going to agroforestry, afforestation, silvopasture, and so on and so forth. And then, you know, as the recent report, you know, shows, the investment of nature in cities is even much smaller, below 1%. So there are two things that, you know, I think are emerging as very clear. One, we don't do nowhere near enough when it comes to nature in cities. And number two, you know, even though we have our very committed mayors here, you know, the mayors alone cannot, you know, be the only ones, you know, committing to this agenda. We need everyone, public and private sector, to commit to this agenda. Latin America and the Caribbean is home to 40% of the global biodiversity. Latin America and the Caribbean has 11 out of the 14th biomes globally. It's also, it stores 30% of all the water, fresh water of the world. We have an incredible opportunity to preserve and use nature, not only in rural areas, but also in urban areas. Now, as mayors, as cities, we have control of different things. We have control of land, we have control of planning, we have control of a variety of responsibilities that actually, you know, can truly empower the implementation of nature-based solutions. And I think, you know, it's very important to start thinking about how, through standards, through, you know, different, regulatory instruments, you know, it can be, nature-based solutions can be mainstream into planning. You know, the square meters of parks that you will require in expansion areas. How do you work with, you know, the adjoining, if you want, administration to ensure that, you know, there is that preservation of land in the territory. When you think about, you know, coastal solutions, you know, when you think about your waterfronts, think about nature-based solutions through infrastructure choices and design. When you're thinking about, you know, social housing, think about, you know, how you can turn that into, and you know, and not just housing, it can be, you know, it can be also, you know, public buildings like schools. How do you turn those into nature positive, investments? Buenos Aires a few years ago started a new pilot program of green roofs. Why? Because there was no sufficient space, you know, for kids to basically, you know, enjoy outing, you know, during school hours. At the same time, because it was also an opportunity for them to learn about nature. The space is limited, find alternatives. I think there is different tools. I was talking about planning, I was talking about investment. I think there is, you know, incentives that we need to work maybe at higher level, financial incentives, so that public sector also can participate more actively in being an actor in investment in nature-based solutions. I mean, I was thinking earlier on, and it was like, you know, probably, you know, things like blended finance is spoken a lot about, but it's local, it's sectoral, so, you know, it has to be taken on case by case. But for instance, through adjusting, you know, paying structures to create, you know, the adequate revenue flows that investors so much need. And, you know, from our side, maybe I think, you know, we need to work also more actively on pilot demonstration projects to scale up. And I was thinking about, you know, the small pilot that we did with Monteria on, you know, tree lining, you know, into one of their streets to measure temperature, to the way it reduces heat island effects and so on and so forth. And, you know, how that can be then upscaled with data, which is the other problem that, you know, we were finding out. I'll take a pause there. Thank you.
No, that was great. All of you mentioned the multiple benefits that urban NBS can provide. Heat island risk reduction, it can be considered when you think about affordable housing, flood control, recreation. that also means that you need coordination across many city agencies. That doesn't always happen. I would love some examples from you of best practice when you have been able to get multiple agencies working together, and maybe how that's unlocked urban MBS implementation and finance.
Thank you, Todd. Quiero poner un ejemplo, primero que iniciemos con un contexto de qué pasó en el año 2015. Se firma el Acuerdo de París, 195 países firman un acuerdo con un compromiso de evitar el calentamiento global, evitar que lleguemos a los 2 grados antes de finalizar el siglo. Se hace una agenda importante de mitigación, cómo disminuir los gases de efecto invernadero, cómo capturar ese CO2 de la atmósfera, cómo tener instrumentos de adaptación por lo que está sucediendo y de resiliencia, pérdidas y daños, que lo estamos viendo hoy en todo el planeta, en especial en las islas del Caribe. Y desde ahí hay una agenda climática de los países, que son las NDCs. Y las NDCs tienen metas de mitigación, y hablamos de transición energética, movilidad sostenible, economía circular, agricultura, y por supuesto conservación, lucha contra la deforestación. Toda esa agenda baja a los países y por supuesto debe bajar al territorio. Ahora voy a hacerlo a la inversa. ¿Las ciudades tienen ese conocimiento? No todas las ciudades tienen el conocimiento de esos compromisos globales. Entonces hay un primer punto, tener la visión y alineación desde la ciudad, desde el territorio, hacia las metas globales, porque los recursos financieros no están solamente en el presupuesto público de la ciudad. Entonces, cuando uno llega el primer día como alcalde, lo primero que hace es ver su presupuesto. Y a partir de ese presupuesto ver cómo va a trabajar en su agenda. En este caso, soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, agenda verde, no alcanza el presupuesto, porque el alcalde tiene prioridades, educación, salud, vías, saneamiento, y cuando llega la agenda climática ya no alcanza. Entonces, esa alineación desde el territorio a las metas globales va a ayudar a que haya recursos y tenemos que hacerlo transversalmente. En un minuto, un ejemplo. Barranquilla, aprovechando que mi amigo y alcalde estuvo aquí ahora, alcalde Pumarejo, tiene un sueño maravilloso, la Ciénaga de Mallorquín, un proyecto de sostenibilidad, de espacio público, de resiliencia, de adaptación, hermoso, que une y conecta a toda la ciudad con los temas de biodiversidad y ambientales. Tiene un sueño, diseña un proyecto con recursos propios, va al ministerio, al gobierno nacional, vamos, conjuntamente vemos ese proyecto, conseguimos el dinero con su presupuesto, con el presupuesto del gobierno nacional de la nación, se consigue apoyo del BID, se consigue apoyo del WEF, se consigue apoyo de WRI en toda la planeación y la estructura. Miren ya cómo vamos, meta global de adaptación, de mitigación, entidades locales, gobierno nacional colocando recursos a un buen proyecto, la banca multilateral y la banca privada colocando recursos en ese proyecto, y desde ahí se convierte un proyecto con un propósito colectivo, transversal, local, subnacional, nacional, global, y aquí está contando su historia con todo el apoyo de estas entidades a nivel internacional. Entonces, tiene que partir de un proyecto que tenga potencia para poderlo llevar y buscar el financiamiento. Y para cerrar, el financiamiento climático también cambió. Hoy no solamente estamos hablando que hay posibilidades de los recursos públicos, hoy estamos hablando de blended finance, estamos hablando de fondos de impacto, estamos hablando de green bonds, estamos hablando de cofinanciación con la banca multilateral, de grants, de donaciones de países no reembolsables, pero hay que tener un proyecto. Entonces, esa transversalidad es fundamental para el financiamiento de los proyectos climáticos, de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza de cada una de las ciudades.
That was excellent. Mauricio, maybe building on that and thinking, we've talked a lot about what cities can and should do. How do we think about what others need to do to enable cities to be successful, whether that's national governments, corporations, the financial sector. How do we bring those pieces together and catalyze action?
Well, building upon what Carlos just said, I think that what's needed is a multi-stakeholder partnership. Otherwise, it will be impossible because no public money will ever be enough to meet the challenge, right? So I think that there's a number of things different actors can do. And I think that it is relatively easy to make the case of why this is so important. We already mentioned some of the facts about why investing in nature is important for public health, for protecting people, from so on and so forth. But let's also talk about numbers. So there's a lot of evidence about the economic benefits of investing in nature, of the benefits in terms of job creation of investing in nature-based solutions. However, only 0.3% of total urban infrastructure investments today are channeled to nature-based solutions. We have to make that case. I think we need a stronger communications effort in this regard. I know, some efforts have been developed, but we need to do much, much more in this regard to convince all of these actors about why this is a good idea and it is actually a must that we should be thinking about. During the Biodiversity COP 15 last December in Montreal, a group of cities, including Barranquilla, signed a declaration and a call to action to mobilize investments for nature-based solutions. And they were calling precisely a number of actors to come to the table and be part of these multi-stakeholder partnerships. So they, for example, were calling international financial institutions to develop more direct financial facilities for cities to invest in nature-based solutions. There are some, and I have to acknowledge efforts made by the IDB, the World Bank, the EBRD in lending directly to cities, but of course, much, much more needs to be done on part of the current international financial institutions, and why not exploring bold, disruptive reforms to the international financial system by creating new and innovative direct financial facilities for cities, including a new institutional framework that can, among other ideas, explore, why not, the setting up of a green cities development bank that would work directly with cities. These are some of the ideas that I think we need to keep exploring and think further. I think we need, and going back to the declaration that was signed by several cities during COP15, we need to call for a multi-level and multi-governance scheme and effort. We need to work and close in a much closer way with the national governments, with different levels of government to undertake reforms to the legal and financial framework to channel more resources into urban nature-based solutions. We need, as Eugénie mentioned, to develop more data. And that's something where the academia, where civil society can be pivotal. And we need, of course, to call the private sector to jointly develop new business models for making investments in nature-based solutions more attractive. There are good examples, like the one in Barranquilla and in many other cities. Melbourne in Australia is a great example of private sector involvement in nature-based solutions. Why not taking a closer look at those and replicate what's working?
Fantastic. And you mentioned the joint declaration that was signed in Montreal. Similarly, at the COP, I think 11 or 13 MDBs signed the joint statement on nature. I'd love your thoughts on how you see that declaration being put into practice. What can the IDB really do to capitalize on all this enthusiasm and excitement coming from cities and make sure those flows of finance can hit the ground?
Thanks. A few years ago, we did an evaluation of, our approvals, and we realized that we had approved approximately $800 million in 28 projects and components. Many of them, as Eugénie was saying at the very beginning, is components, is not, targeting projects, supporting nature solutions. And we thought that probably wasn't enough. So I think in order to promote, nature-based solutions through our pipeline, through our portfolio, there's been efforts of different sorts. First of all, I have to acknowledge that my team, especially through the Cities Network, the IDB Cities Network, took the stand to try to generate, or support leadership, and when I talk about leadership, I'm talking about, the mayors and their teams, and through a series of initiatives, of trainings, webinars, and a platform of knowledge exchange. So, the biodiversity initiative that was being led by Colombia, it was in initial stages at that time, and was the basis for a lot of the exchanges that then went on to adaptation and so on. The second area, which I think is very interesting, and I'm very proud to share with the rest of the audience, was the establishment of a natural capital lab approximately 3 years ago, something like that. And the natural capital lab, focused on generating an, innovative financing both for public and private sector, not with a focus on cities, with a broader focus. And it has since then tested a diversity of new models for natural capital finance, and especially the debt swap for nature that was done in Barbados last year is an excellent example of how to reorient savings to nature. It also, works very actively on accelerating the deployment of new technologies that will support nature, the creating of enabling regulatory frameworks that attract private investors. And talking of private investors, making that connection in between good projects and investors that, want to work on them. And last but not least is, is also tasked with, conducting valuations and, helping with risk management options. Because at the end of the day, if investing in cities directly is complicated as it is, investing in nature in cities directly is even more complicated. And the third item that I just wanted to quickly mention is that we truly started looking for projects, trying to foster nature positive projects that would support, and the case of Barranquilla was an excellent example. We have another case, for instance, now where we're creating a park, a metropolitan park in between La Paz and El Alto, which once again has tons of co-benefits, and at the same time try to make sure that we continued mainstreaming nature into the different activities that we were undertaking. I know I've taken too long, so I'll just pause there.
That's perfect. So we literally are down to our last minute here. So 20 seconds each. You've got a magic wand. You can make anything in the world happen, but you've got 20 seconds to articulate it related to urban NBS.
Quisiera que todas las ciudades trabajaran para generar mayor conciencia del cuidado de la biodiversidad, de construir una economía baja en carbono, pero lo más importante, construirla de la mano con la gente, desde la base, para poder crear una conciencia colectiva y poder salvar el planeta, que es lo que realmente queremos. Vivir, tener una mejor vida, una mejor calidad de vida en nuestras ciudades.
Some mayors may think that investing in nature may not be politically profitable, that it may sound too sophisticated for a developing country city. But there's nothing more politically profitable than saving people's lives and improving people's quality of life.
And for me, I have to say that nature, covers a lot of things. It has its environmental aspects, but at the end of the day, nature is environment, is social, is economic, as Mauricio was just saying, gains for all of us. And I think we all have to invest in the future of our planet. Thank you.
Perfect. Carlos, Mauricio, Tatiana, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd and Carlos, Tatiana, Mauricio, for this fantastic panel. Thank you. Now we're moving to our closing remarks, and I want to introduce Mia Kallenberg. She's an environmental specialist with Sustainable Cities program at the Global Environmental Fund facility, where she provides technical, analytical, and coordination support to the UrbanShift initiative and contributes to the design and delivery of the GEF portfolio of integrated programs. So please welcome Mia for the closing remarks. Yeah.
Yes, you hear me? Yeah. So thank you so much, Pablo, and thank you everyone for these great insights. It's really a privilege to be part of this group of experts that drives this agenda forward. So on behalf of the GEF, we are so pleased to support UrbanShift and support cities worldwide in strengthening their capacity and facilitating a larger flow of finance to nature-based solutions. And in fact, since we started the cities program in 2016, we have seen that the focus on nature is just increasing and increasing. In the first phase, a few cities had components of nature integrated. And now as we see UrbanShift really kicking off, basically every city is working with urban nature-based solutions in one way or another. And this has, to a very large extent, been driven by cities themselves. So I think that to create this interest and create the confidence that cities need to do that, research and report such as the State of Finance for Nature in Cities are invaluable, and they really help raising awareness, and they help showcasing the business models and the business case for this. And of course, even more important is to have good examples to look at and learn from. I really want to thank all the mayors and also the former mayors, of course, for your ambitious work and for sharing your experience today. So big congratulations to you all. And then from the GEF side, we are now working on the new cycle of this program of funding in GEF 8. And nature is a really hot topic. We see more and more cities taking a metropolitan approach, also looking at linkages with rural areas. And we're also happy to be able to support more smaller and secondary cities, cities that usually struggle to access finance, but where a lot can be gained if they get it right from the beginning. So lastly, we at the GEF are very excited to have been selected as the financial mechanism for the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. And also to work with WRI and host the new secretariat for the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. And I think this is really a historic effort to help protect and conserve 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030. And of course, we will make sure that this work involves cities and local governments. And I think we have a pretty solid partnership to build on here. So really looking forward to continuing to work with mayors all over the world and working with partners such as UNEP and WRI to create new ways to get finance for nature in cities. So thanks again, everyone, for a great event, and I'm gonna hand it back over to Pablo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mia. Let me use this opportunity to extend my gratitude on behalf of the whole UrbanShift team for GEF, for the entire financial support towards the initiative and the leadership really on driving and foster sustainable integrated urban development in cities worldwide. I think there are many takeaways that these two sessions and panels are giving us. And I think it's amazing the range of opportunities that we just heard can happen to incorporate more nature in cities. And my three takeaways, if I may share it with you, the first one is we're not doing any more sustainable development. We're doing regenerative development. We heard from the mayors in Niteroi, Barranquilla, and in Costa Rica. It is about regenerate things that nature had in the city, and for one reason or another, we kind of left it neglected or destroyed, and now we need to regenerate. So I think we need to shift gears and think about that. And that means that the whole procurement process of public works in cities have to change. They really need to embrace this kind of new approach. The second thing is everybody here talk about people. Mauricio, Carlos, Mayor Pumarejo, and I think, it's a no-brainer. The team in city public works units have a reduced amount of heads and mind thinking about something. If you involve communities, you have more minds working towards the same goal. So why not co-create and why not collaborate? And the third one, I'm going to go back to Eugénie's report, and it's remarkable. If it's only 0.3% of the budget that goes to NBSs, if we escalate this by 100, which means only 1/3, 30%, can you imagine what we can do in cities for nature-based solutions? It's amazing. I mean, we will have a huge transformation ready to deploy. And I think that is fundamental to understand how small the change in investment can really shift gear and move towards something really valuable for people in the long term. This City Summit in the Americas is exactly the type of gathering we need, I have to say, to accelerate collaboration, inspire action, and share best practices. And I would encourage you that this is not the end of the conversation, it's the beginning of conversations that need to happen at many levels. I want to extend the gratitude of the US Department for organizing this summit and giving us the space to discuss and talk about this. And lastly, please feel free to connect with and follow UrbanShift and Cities4Forests initiatives, two great initiatives of the World Resources Institute and our partners, and the details are on the screen. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Todd, for doing this sunrise exercise that gives us some breathing space. And have a great afternoon, and see you next year.